In 1983, a Soviet military officer sat alone in a bunker outside Moscow, watching a screen that told him the United States had just launched 5 nuclear missiles at the Soviet Union. His name was Stanislav Petrov. He was 44 years old, a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Defense Forces, and he had about 4 minutes to decide whether or not to start World War III. He decided the screen was wrong. That decision, made by one man, alone, in a room, on a gut feeling, is almost certainly the reason you are alive today. Let's back up. It was September 26, 1983. The Cold War was at one of its tensest points in decades. Just 3 weeks earlier, the Soviet military had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007 after it strayed into Soviet airspace, killing all 269 people on board, including a U.S. congressman. The Americans were furious. The Soviets were defensive. Both sides were watching each other with the kind of paranoid intensity that makes accidents very, very likely. Petrov was the duty officer that night at Serpukhov 15, a secret Soviet missile detection bunker. His job was to monitor the OKO early warning satellite system, a network of satellites designed to detect the heat signatures of American ballistic missile launches. If the system said the Americans had fired, Petrov's job was to report it up the chain of command, which would then trigger a retaliatory strike. The system was new. It had been operational for less than a year, and it was, as Petrov already suspected, not entirely reliable. At 12:14 in the morning, the alarm went off. Not a gentle alert, not a yellow warning. The system blared at maximum volume, and the screen lit up with a single word that Soviet engineers had chosen, with remarkable lack of subtlety, to describe this exact scenario: launch. One American missile, according to the satellite, was on its way. Petrov had to make an immediate call. The Soviet doctrine at the time was launch on warning, meaning you don't wait to see if the missiles actually arrive. You fire back immediately before they can destroy your own weapons. If Petrov reported the launch as real, Soviet leadership would have minutes to decide on a counterstrike. But Petrov hesitated. His reasoning, described later in interviews, was almost maddeningly logical. A real American first strike would not involve one missile. If the United States had decided to start a nuclear war, they would send everything they had, all at once, to destroy Soviet retaliatory capacity before it could be used. One missile made no military sense. One missile was either a mistake or a malfunction. Then the screen updated. 2 missiles, then 3, then 4, then 5. The system was now reporting a full-scale American nuclear attack. Every protocol, every piece of training, every procedure Petrov had ever learned said this was real, and he needed to report it immediately. He did not report it. For 23 agonizing minutes, which is roughly how long it would take actual missiles to arrive, Petrov sat in the bunker, with his staff staring at him, with the alarm still screaming, and he waited. His logic? The satellite system had been glitchy. Ground radar had not confirmed any launches. 5 missiles was still a suspiciously small number for a first strike. And crucially, he later said, he simply had a feeling. He had a feeling it was wrong. He was right. The false alarm was caused by a rare alignment of sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds directly into the satellite sensors in a way that mimicked the heat signature of a missile launch. The OKO system, under certain atmospheric conditions, could not tell the difference between a Soviet nuclear nightmare and sunlight on clouds.
The Soviet military quietly fixed the satellite system. Petrov was neither praised nor punished. Officially, the incident didn't happen. He was eventually reprimanded, not for anything related to his decision, but for improperly filling out his logbook that night. Apparently, while he was single-handedly preventing nuclear war, his paperwork wasn't up to standard. He retired in 1984 and moved to a small town outside Moscow, where he lived modestly on a pension. For years, almost nobody knew what he had done. He didn't talk about it. He later said he didn't consider himself a hero. He had simply done his job and done it correctly. The world found out in 1998 when a retired Soviet general published his memoirs and mentioned the incident. Journalists tracked Petrov down. He was living alone, his wife had died, and he was genuinely puzzled by the attention. In 2006, he was quietly given an award by a small UN-affiliated organization at a ceremony in New York. He was visibly uncomfortable receiving it. When asked what he felt in the bunker in those 23 minutes, he said, "I had a sick feeling in my stomach." He died in May 2017 at the age of 77. His death went unnoticed for several months before journalists discovered it. Here is what's worth sitting with for a moment. The entire nuclear doctrine of the Cold War, the mutually assured destruction that was supposed to keep both sides from firing, depended on the assumption that the systems were reliable and the humans operating them were rational. Petrov's incident proved that the systems weren't reliable, and what saved humanity wasn't doctrine or protocol or technology. It was one tired man's gut feeling at midnight in a bunker outside Moscow, who looked at a screen telling him the world was ending and decided, quietly and without authority, that it was probably wrong. He was not supposed to make that call. His job was to report, not to judge. But he judged anyway. There are other incidents like this one, moments in the Cold War where the only thing standing between civilization and catastrophe was a single human being making an off-script decision. Petrov's is perhaps the clearest example, because his reasoning was documented, because the cause of the false alarm was verified, and because the consequences of the alternative are not hard to imagine. The next time someone tells you that one person can't make a difference, remember Stanislav Petrov, a Soviet lieutenant colonel who saved the world by doing nothing, who was reprimanded for bad paperwork, and who spent the rest of his life mildly baffled that people thought this was remarkable. He thought it was obvious. Maybe that's the most unsettling part. Hit subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.